Next, from Springfield, we attend a press conference with mayors from DuPage County as they urge the state to preserve local funding. This runs about 35 minutes.
Well, thank you. My name is GAYLE SMOLINSKI. I'm mayor of the Village of Roselle and president of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference. Today, for the speakers, I am joined by GERRY BENNETT. He's mayor of the Village of Palos Hills and president of the Southwest Conference of Mayors. David BRUMMEL, mayor of the Village of Warrenville and president-elect of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference. Joseph MANCINO, mayor of the Village of Hawthorn Woods and president of the Lake County Municipal League. And Matthew BROLLEY, village president of Montgomery and president of the Metro West Council of Government. And what I'd like to do is have each of the mayors standing behind me just say the name of their town so you can see how well we are represented in the whole area. So if you would like to.
Village of Itasca.
Village of Villa Park.
Village of Addison.
City of North Chicago.
City of Warrenville.
Village of Wadsworth.
City of Palos Hills.
Village of Lisle.
Village of Hawthorn Woods.
Village of Montgomery.
Village of Woodridge. Village of Wayne.
And Village of Roselle. We and many other Illinois mayors are in Springfield today to discuss issues of critical importance for our municipalities and our residents. Our first issue is ensuring the timely distribution of local revenues. The state budget impasse that began last year resulted in the withholding of local revenue for a lack of a state budget. This included revenue from motor fuel tax, local use tax, casinos, video gaming, and the wireless 9/11 surcharge. The revenue simply built up in an account. It was not available for any other purpose, and the dollars were held statewide, even though all of us relied on them. $3.1 billion were withheld from local governments, and $28 million specifically from DuPage County. After 6 months, legislation was approved to release the funds. Our local governments across the state are very grateful to the legislature and to the Governor Ronner for approving that solution. In fiscal 2017, if a budget is not approved by July 1st of this year, these funds will again be withheld. Legislation is required before July 1st to release these funds, or better still, to make these part of continuing appropriations which do not rely on an annual state budget, so that we can avoid this problem for this coming year. Senate Bill 3019, which was initiated by the Illinois Municipal League and is sponsored by Senator Tom Cullerton, will resolve this problem if approved by the General Assembly and the Governor. And we have Senator Governor, how about that one? We have Senator Tom Cullerton with us today, and I wish to publicly thank you for your efforts on our behalf. Now, for Roselle, this meant $500,000 or $500,000 was withheld. Because we didn't know when or if we were going to get this money, we had to put on delay repairing potholes on our streets because we had about $250,000 was MFT funds. We couldn't order road salt. Luckily, we had a very light winter for plowing, but we didn't know that going into this. The other $250,000, we had to delay hiring some public safety personnel. So we don't want this to continue. That's why Senate Bill 3019 is very important to us. And again, Senator Cullerton, thank you for your work in that. Our next speaker is Palos Hills Mayor GERRY BENNETT.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm here to address the issue on pension.
Can you tell us who you represent?
I'm sorry. I'm, again, Mayor GERRY BENNETT, City of Palos Hills. To speak on the issue of pension, the pension crisis that still exists for local governments. We are down here this year on two fronts. One, to ask the members of the General Assembly to again look at and consider the consolidation of police and fire pension funds. As you know, there's almost 660 independent police and fire funds throughout the state of Illinois. And the dilemma that we have seen and know can actually help cut our costs for pension is to consolidate those under one fund, similar to what the RF fund does today. And two things happen. One, by consolidation, you are eliminating the additional management costs that 660 plus funds would have to undergo each year as they do. But more importantly, by the consolidation of those funds, we will now have a larger pot of money for a greater investment return. As you know, the actuarials that we're required to go by on an annual basis involve three things. One, what the police officers contribute. Two, what the fund develops as far as investments. And again, the actuarial average should be about 7.5%. And third, whatever difference is not made by that 7.5%, the local government has to pick up not only our share, but that additional potential loss of any funding returns lower than 7.5%. The Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which is the best fund in the state of Illinois, it is almost 100% funded, generates almost a 20% return on their money every year. I guarantee you, if you ask local government, including my town in Palos Hills, what kind of return on investments, they'll tell you that certainly over the last years with the recession has averaged less than 7.5%. Vis-a-vis, local government's contributions and to that fund have to increase. The other thing that we are asking for is a freeze on the proposal, or not the proposal, the state legislation that was passed back in 2010 that now is going to require municipalities to make up annually or put into their fund annually up to 90% of their annual actuarial value. We believe that we cannot do that. It's not sustainable. The rising chart of increased costs because of the accumulated past debt will never make, for many towns, will never make that. And we're asking for the General Assembly to freeze that. I know the city of Chicago has been on board in indicating that they possibly could not make that 90% funding each year. But, getting back to the bottom line in the state of Illinois, understand that local governments have no control over the downstate police and fire pension. That is controlled by the General Assembly. The increases that have taken place over the last 15 years have doubled almost the value of those pensions for those police officers. We have tried to maintain that additional increase over the period of time, but unfortunately, back in 1996, when the General Assembly also put caps, property tax caps, on local governments, especially those who are non-home rule, which represent 80% of the cities and villages in the state of Illinois are non-home rule, we are capped. And how can, on one hand, can you create legislation which gives a pension, which we believe in support that our police and fire should have a pension, and the way to pay for that is in the property tax levy under police pension to be capped. And how can you make up, especially over the last 15 years, the increases in those amount of dollars required for us to put into that fund, and on the other hand, strangle the amount of money that we're able to raise locally, legally, and by state statute to put into that fund. The bottom line here is that the general funds of every city and village in this state continue to go down and squeezed because we have to now put money from our general fund into those pension requirements each year. It's unsustainable. We cannot continue at the rate that we're doing to be squeezed on one hand of increased costs, and on the other hand, the elimination of the ability to pay for it. It doesn't make sense. There's no way that a city or village can maintain that type of funding for our police and fire. We understand what the courts have done, but again, under the two conditions that we're talking about, one, a consolidation of the funds, and certainly now a relook at the freezing of what's required on an annual basis to meet the annual appropriations. We are desperately asking the General Assembly to reconsider that and to help us out. And finally, what's being proposed in this last week about a property tax freeze? Well, guess what? A property tax freeze, initially, when they were talking about it, was supposed to be a 2-year situation. They're now talking about it being permanent. And also in the original proposal, they were still going to allow police pension levy to be allowed to be put into the levy to be increased each year. That's now talking about being frozen. So you have now off all ability by state statute and state regulations for us to raise money to pay for our police pension. All that's going to come from our general fund. And I'll tell you what, as a rise in costs continue, within another 10 years, those numbers will double. Believe me, someday across the state of Illinois, all you're going to see are part-time police departments and nothing else in the city, because all monies that are generated by local government, all of our abilities to provide public works services, plowing streets, building departments, recreation departments, there won't be any. All that'll be left is a part-time police department with all monies generated by a city going into that department. It's a serious crisis, and we, again, at least in the short term here, ask the General Assembly to consider the consolidation problem and also about the mandatory amount of money that's annually put into those funds. Gail?
Okay, next we have Mayor Dave Brummel, who's going to talk about PSEBA and workers' compensation.
Thank you, Gail. I am Mayor David Brummel, City of Warrenville, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about this issue. And thank you, Jerry, for being here. I will be the next president of DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference starting on June 1st, and I'd like to discuss the needed reforms for both workmen's compensation and PSEBA. The Public Safety Employee Benefits Act, commonly known as PSEBA, was created to guarantee ongoing health insurance to those injured doing their duty to protect the public, and injured so catastrophically that they cannot get other employment that would provide health insurance. There is a similar federal statute that also uses the term catastrophic injury that is implemented in exactly that way. Unfortunately, the Illinois courts have decided that PSEBA provides health insurance completely paid for by the taxpayers to any public safety employee who receives disability, even if they get alternative employment that offers health care. Legislation is required to preserve the original intent of this law, to assist those truly in need without allowing excessive claims that burden taxpayers. Taxpayers face similar unjustified expenses due to the current state of laws regarding workmen's compensation. As with PSEBA, we fully support providing needed benefits to those who need and deserve them because of injuries received in public service. But we must close the loopholes that allow for abuse of those benefits. For example, if a person loses 15% use of their leg, they are compensated accordingly. If the same employee later is shown to have lost 25% of that same leg, they will receive the incremental benefit of 10% increase in the lost use. However, if the first injury is to a shoulder, then because of workmen's compensation ruling, and later injury results in total loss of the use of that same shoulder, then because of the workmen's compensation ruling, that person is compensated with no discount for the previous amount paid. There are a number of similar procedural reforms that will help not only taxpayers who fund payments to public employees, but private businesses and produce greater economic development throughout Illinois. So thank you again. I now turn the microphone over to Mayor Joseph MANCINO.
Thank you. My name is Joseph MANCINO. I'm the mayor of the Village of Hawthorn Woods and also the president of the Lake County Municipal League. We represent 42 communities in Lake County in the northern portion of the state. Thank you for being here this morning. I wanted to just touch on a House bill that was approved last month in the House. That's House Bill 696, which contemplates a permanent property tax freeze on local units of government. Any future property tax freezes would require a voter referendum in order to be enacted. Of course, similar proposals have been spoken about for years. Property taxes are one thing that we as mayors hear about on a regular basis, although it's hard to understand that it's not all our fault. We're constantly saying that. On average, Illinois, and we've all heard about it in the press, does have a much higher rate of property taxes than pretty much anywhere else in the country, something none of us are proud of. But it's not as simple as the easy headlines make it sound, a property tax freeze. First of all, a property tax freeze would do absolutely nothing to help the state financial and budget crisis that we're facing right now. The state receives no property tax revenues. Therefore, a freeze, should it be enacted, would not help the state and their crisis at all. Secondly, state law formulates how property taxes are levied. And in that formula, it changes how any individual may pay their taxes from year to year. Therefore, a property tax freeze does not guarantee that anybody may see a reduction in their property taxes. This bill also has many carve-outs for non-home rule, for home rule municipalities. They would not be subject to this freeze. That includes the city of Chicago. So you're talking about millions and millions of people who would not benefit at all from any type of property tax freeze. And any communities that are non-home rule would now have another challenge put against them that other communities don't have in their ability to raise funds. And finally, it's very popular to talk about freezing property taxes or lowering property taxes. I have this conversation at the grocery store, at the gas station in town, every week with my own residents. And they come up to me and talk about their property taxes and how high they have become. Many folks still don't understand the vast majority of your property taxes are going to fund our local public school systems. And over the decades that the state of Illinois has underfunded that ratio of monies for school systems, the local governments have to rely more and more on local property taxes, and you've seen that increase. To give a quick example, my personal property taxes are $12,300. A full 71% of that goes to the local schools, about $8,800. In comparison, our village gets 4.9%, $612 out of $12,300. So for $612, your local municipality plows all the streets. We have a full-time police department. We have a full-time public works department. We have a wonderful park system that's not a taxing district. $612, the local municipality. So the idea that our budgets are out of control because the local governments are out of control is just false, and the numbers are there to prove it. A couple of years ago, in 2010, the Village of Hawthorn Woods was paying too much money in overtime to our police department. It reached a point where it made much more sense to bring in a full-time police officer to add to our staff, as opposed to continuing to wear down the folks we had and pay all these overtime rates. We increased our levy by $73,000 roughly just to hire, that was the cost to bring in a new full-time police officer. If there was a property tax freeze and we had to go to referendum, it would be 2 years, possibly 3 years, possibly never before we can add public safety and therefore serve our residents. So property tax freeze, popular in the headlines, not reality when you dig down a little bit deeper. We urge our state legislators to concentrate and focus their efforts on what is happening in Springfield and the budget crisis for the state in its entirety, which will affect everybody here in Illinois. Thank you very much. Our final presenter is Mayor BROLLEY.
Thank you, Mayor. As I stated at the beginning, my name is Matt BROLLEY. I'm the village president in Montgomery, also here today with as the president of Metro West. In Springfield, we represent communities in Kendall, Kane, and DeKalb counties. I'm here to talk today about the, really just kind of sum up the conversation that we're having. In addition to the possible withholding of local revenues, limitations on municipal authority to collect revenue, and the potential loss of revenue due to the pension contribution penalty provision, which were discussed already. In recent years, the legislature has considered proposals to cut the share of the income tax that has been distributed to municipalities since Illinois first imposed the tax. The local portion of this income tax, commonly called LGDF, was part of the original agreement between the state and the municipalities to have the state levy the tax and distribute that to the local governments, rather than allowing each taxing body to implement their own tax. We are extremely grateful to the governor and the General Assembly that such proposals have not come to fruition in past years. However, we want to remind our citizens, the media, and the legislature today how critical these LGDF revenues are to our ability to provide core services such as public safety, road maintenance, garbage pickup, and so much more that residents and businesses in our community rely on every day. And I'll give you one Montgomery issue, one scenario from Montgomery that we had. When the proposal came down last year, we put a halt on $500,000 in our general fund budget of 8.8 that we didn't want to do anything with. We didn't know what was going to happen in Springfield. So we put off the purchasing of new squad cars, new plows for public works, seal coating the village properties. All of these issues, hiring of a police officer, all of these are concrete improvements that our residents come to rely on and appreciate. So while doing that 1 year is not going to bring Montgomery to a halt, it will be detrimental to us in the future going forward. So I thought I'd give that highlight, and with that, I can turn it over to Mayor SMOLINSKI for questions. Awesome.
Okay, are there any questions?
Mayor, between local LGDF, casino money, property tax freeze, local pensions, does it feel like deja vu? This is something you have to you're talking about every year?
This is my 30th drive down. So I've been coming down here since 1986, and the issues haven't changed. We've never had the direct threat to LGDF and property tax freeze then, but we've been talking about pensions and the burdens on local municipalities for 30 years. So we saw it coming long before our legislators did. It's a constant battle for us. We're always in a defensive posture down here. We would rather work with our legislators on positive things, but the things that are being put forth right now are threatening the very existence of municipalities. And right now, municipalities, I think I can state, and everybody would agree, are the only things that are working in this state. We're the first line of defense.
I think somebody talked about pension. Gosh, the fire and police, they run toward the danger, everybody else runs against it. They put in their time, and now, what about the pensions? I mean, as someone who, there's nobody friendlier than a small-town mayor, I like to say. How do you look those cops and firefighters in the eye and say, have pension, it's really gonna be a problem?
If you'd like to.
And you're Jerry Bennett?
Yes, Jerry Bennett, Palos.
Come and spell it? 2 N's, 2 T's?
Yes, sir. This is my 35th drive down. So let me tell you that there's not a mayor in this state who does not want to and believe that our police and fire people deserve a pension. We've always believed in that. But what's taken place over the last 15 years has been an out-of-control benefit increase. The doubling of, or the compounding of the interest on that pension, the lowering of the retirement age, the increase in the total amount that they can retire on, now the inclusion of a spouse, 100% till death. So when the mayor talked about hiring a police officer, maybe a $75,000 a year salary, it's not that. You have to consider, once you hire a police officer, it is for life, meaning till the day he dies, and also his spouse till the day they die. And I'll guarantee you, based upon actuarials, every police officer knew today that you hire, by the time he or his wife, spouse, no longer on the system, will have paid close to $3 million in pension, not his salary during those years, but in his pension costs over the remaining. He can retire after 20 years, or he can work for 20 or 25 years and retire for 35 or 40. So you can see how these numbers, they just don't work.
Till death do us part. I mean, geez, at least I can get a divorce. Now, the Illinois Supreme Court has had some say about pensions, and what confidence do you have that maybe you and the lawmakers can get something together that is finally going to pass muster on trying to change the system?
I think we all agree that what the courts have ruled pretty much takes out about 90% of possibilities. Whether or not a new constitutional amendment by law, by state law, to change pensions is possibly the only way to go. And that we're not talking about, and believe me, as I said earlier, the mayors in this room and across the state want to give our police and fire people a pension. They deserve it. But all we're pretty much asking is to go back to the Tier 2 system that we passed back in 2010, which is a fair system, or even to be put under an IMRF system, which is also very fair. We're not talking about eliminating pensions. We're talking about whether or not these funds are going to be sustainable in the future. We believe on the course it's taking right now, they're not. So you may have a pension or not have a pension. That is the question really more so for the rank and file who need to work with us, need to partner with us in being reasonable.
Mayor, let me ask you a couple of questions. To repeat, did you just say you back a constitutional amendment to change the pension so that they can be adjusted?
Right now, it's the only way we think by law that they can. There's going to be no other court case filed that's going to be ruled in favor of reducing those benefits. So the only way it's going to take is a constitutional amendment. We talked about that 4 or 5 years ago. We also believed that the court system would uphold all the benefits given by the General Assembly, and that the only way to go would be to change the constitutional amendment. We also believe that if they had started that 5 years ago, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today, taking it year by year by year with nothing happening.
Not to put words in your mouth, but would you say that if you do not get a constitutional amendment to be able to alter pension benefits, would this drive cities into bankruptcy?
As I indicated in my comments, our town, for example, and many towns, we have doubled our contribution into that pension fund. And every 5 or 10 years, it'll double. So again, you've got a portion of your budget at 15% paying pensions, 30%, 40%, 50%, every resource of the general funds that come into a city, non-pension, are going to go into those pensions. I don't know how you can operate a city. I indicated all that's going to be left is a police department, and for that much, possibly even a part-time department, because we're not even going to be able to afford any new full-time people coming on. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's really the reality of what we're looking at.
When you look at the numbers, and I don't mean to take too much of this, but is it a gradual, like a plane landing, to where we have a slow decline in the services you're able to provide? Or with the baby boomers, are we heading more to a Niagara Falls type of going over the cliff in 2 or 3 years?
Is that death by 1,000 stabbings? I can't give you that scenario other than to know and understand the mayors of this state, the cities and villages of the state, their present financial situation. And believe me, we've all come out of some tough times, and a lot of towns are doing very well. But every new dollar coming into our cities are going into police pension. And that, depending on the town, and now the mandatory amount of 90% annually to meet your annual obligation, you're going to slowly see towns start falling off, because under that law, the General Assembly can take their general or their local LGGF or sales tax and put it into the fund. So they're going to get it one way or another on the back end without the city acting on it. That's why I'm asking that they take a look at it and freeze it right now. But it'll be a slow death, and you'll see slowly, depending on the financial condition of each city, how soon that may happen. But based upon on the actuarials that we're faced with right now, we're talking 10, 15 years maybe that with nothing happening, that's going to be a serious consequence.
And if you were granted carte blanche by the court, make whatever changes you need to manage your cities on the pensions, what pension changes would you make?
Again, we would prefer, which we were able to convince the General Assembly as good partners back in 2010, a two-tier system, which brings those benefits back down to what they used to be. There's no compounding interest. There's a graduated years of retirement. So somebody can't retire now at age 50 after 20 years, can't receive 75% of their pension after 20 or 25 years. And then also to have their spouse at a full, spouses used to be at 50%, it's up to 100%. And believe me, we understand that, and it's a very sensitive topic. But you've got to understand what kind of additional costs that put on the whole actuarial required by local governments.
And did the recipients pay any more for that benefit?
No, the 10%, approximately 10% is what the downstate police and fire employees pay. That always stays the same. So I mentioned earlier about return on investment, which an up and down economy can absolutely kill us, because then it steps up what we have to put in annually. So again, when you talk about a 10-year, 5, 10, 15-year, you're going to see towns start peeling off with starting to close down some major services. Or worse yet, if they are faced with the idea that they can no longer have full-time officers. That's really going to be the impact, public safety, on every city and village in this state. We don't want to see that happen. And as Gayle mentioned, we are the only thing functioning in this entire country. And people know that in the local community. We're just asking for a partnership with the members of the General Assembly and also with members of the police and fire law enforcement agencies out there to work with us. We want that. We want to pay them a pension. We also have to make them realize there's a reality here of sustainability.
The entire country,
Yes.
not just the state, the whole USA.
I said local government, whether it's in this state or any other state, we believe is the only thing functioning now in this country.
Your comments about the property tax freeze is directly at odds with one of the governor's tip-top priorities. Do you have to meet him in the middle on this somewhere?
I think the mayor mentioned it. Go ahead. There's really no benefit here.
I think, and I've spoken to the governor and his staff about it, I think the governor's priority on property tax freeze is related to other savings that can be handed down to local governments as well. A straight property tax freeze, without rehashing what we talked about earlier, really doesn't achieve that. If our hands are tied and we don't have the ability to provide public safety or public works or the other core services in town, we have to be able to find those revenue sources somewhere else. So the governor has said to me, and his staff has said to me, that they're not looking for a straight property tax freeze. They are looking for additional savings to local governments that would allow those taxes to be frozen and additional savings to be used for the core services that we normally provide.
Are you comfortable with the governor's version of things?
Personally, I am comfortable with it, yes.
If I can make one more comment, again, Jerry Bennett, regarding the skewing of where property tax goes. Mayor mentioned 70% goes to local schools, and obviously that's happened over the years because the General Assembly has not funded education. About 10 years ago, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus presented a proposal to the General Assembly that if you do, in fact, consider a income tax increase. Take the dollar for dollar increase, give it to local schools, but they are then required dollar for dollar to lower their local property tax to possibly manage this thing to get back down to where it was years ago at a 50-50 value of state funding and local property tax. But because of what's happened on the shortage of funds going to local schools, you're never going to bring down those local school property tax rates unless there's an exchange of a dollar for dollar. We had a great plan 10 years ago. It was backed by the Civic Federation of Chicago, and unfortunately it didn't go anywhere. But with that increase, you could possibly actually lower local property tax on a dollar for dollar give back to local schools.
Workers' comp, I don't sign the front of a paycheck, and despite my daring do, I have never suffered a workplace injury. And the circles I run with, workers' comp really isn't a thing unless I'm around here. So I don't have an idea of the size, the scale, the scope, what the problem really is. How big and how big is it?
Dave Brummel, City of Warrenville. We have not personally in our town experienced any bad results of the workman's comp as it's presently configured, but we can anticipate situations where that would happen. We have other communities that we're aware that has happened. The problem is, again, as Jerry Bennett alluded to, you have an upfront cost, but then the cost that follows that can be astronomical. So when you take advantage of a system that's made to set up to help someone truly in need, and people find ways to use that system to get a lifetime benefit they really aren't entitled to, and then the community has to pay for that. Cost, again, for that comes out of our general fund and allows the deterioration of our services that we need to put forward. So I guess the bottom line to all this message is that we only have so much money to put into what we need to do. We are not like a business that if we have an unprofitable part of our business, we can jettison that. We are required to do certain things. We have X amount of dollars to do that. The more of our dollars that go to workman's comp claims that perhaps aren't fair when we want to honor the fair ones, or goes to pensions, then that's less money that we have to provide the services that we have to require, that we're required to give to our citizens. So it seems from our perspective a no-brainer to take a closer look at some of those things, to look at definitions that tighten up, making sure that these services or these requirements are met in a way that's sensible, and going forward do not incur costs that someday somebody's not going to be able to pay, or we're going to have to give up our services. Gail?
I would just like to add that one of the things we hear the most is why companies are not interested in coming to Illinois is the cost of workers' comp. It's much higher in the state of Illinois than it is in other states surrounding us, and so that's what many businesses have been telling our economic development people. The cost is it's too expensive to come to the state.
Would the governor's plan for procurement reform have much of an impact on your budgets?
I don't know if it would have an effect. I don't believe it would have an effect on my budget, but it would have an effect, I think, on the state and bringing more business in, which is going to help all of us. Whether the business comes to Itasca or if it comes to, Wadsworth, having a more vibrant Illinois state economy is going to help all the local municipalities.
And what about the governor's plan to allow local municipalities, which he may have, I can't remember if he dropped this, but to give you more flexibility as far as hiring firms that are not unionized?
You're talking about prevailing wage. We have been working on that for the past couple years. We had even made a proposal to put a cap on it. If the union groups are worried about losing business, put a cap on. Let the smaller companies have a chance to bid on our local jobs and say go up to maybe $250,000. Any of the bigger jobs, then it has to be, we have to go prevailing wage. For instance, I have a trustee who sits on my board who owns a locksmith company. He has 3 employees, himself, his brother, and his son. In order to have to, the paperwork involved with having to do prevailing wage is unbelievable. He has to have all sorts of workshops and send them to training. Doesn't need to do that with this small company. And he's jettisoned out of bidding on a lot of things because he can't afford to do some of that. So we think that there's a nice compromise here, to be able to have a cap on it so that smaller companies, smaller businesses are able to grow, minority-owned businesses that are just starting out able to grow until they reach a certain height, and then they can go to prevailing wage.
Let me ask you something I'm sure you'll love. We look at East St. Louis, It sits there rotting, and yet it's a development office right on the river. Heavy rail, light rail. To what extent, from your perspective, is the state too Chicago-centric, and your communities are suffering because the political power is held in too few hands in one city?
Ooh. Okay, I'll go ahead. I do believe it's too Chicago-centric. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the city of Chicago is wonderful. I think our surrounding areas all grew because of that. But there are other areas of the state that also need help. And they don't often get a chance to compete with money because it goes to Chicago first. That's my personal opinion. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for coming today, and we hope we're going to see a lot of this on your local news feeds. We need your help getting our message out.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.